Which openings lead to the king's Indian structure? Imagine a chessboard where the pieces are poised for a battle of strategy and skill. The king's Indian defense is a popular choice among players who appreciate dynamic positions and complex pawn structures. But how do you reach this fascinating setup? To arrive at the king's Indian structure, one common opening is the king's Indian defense itself, which begins with the moves pawn to d4, pawn to nf6, pawn to c4, and pawn to g6. This setup allows black to fianchetto the dark-squared bishop, creating a solid yet flexible position. Another way to reach this structure is through the Nimzo-Indian Defense. This opening starts with pawn to d4, pawn to nf6, pawn to c4, and then pawn to e6. After this, if white plays pawn to nc3 and black responds with pawn to d5, the game can transition into a king's Indian structure depending on the subsequent moves. The Benoni Defense is also a pathway to the king's Indian. It begins with pawn to d4, pawn to nf6, pawn to c4, and then pawn to c5. If white plays pawn to d5, black can respond with pawn to e6, leading to positions that resemble the king's Indian defense. Lastly, the Pirc defense can lead to this structure. It starts with pawn to e4, pawn to d6, and after white plays pawn to d4, black can play pawn to nf6 and then pawn to g6, transitioning into a king's Indian setup. Each of these openings provides a different route to the king's Indian structure, allowing players to choose based on their style and preferences. Understanding these pathways can enhance your strategic choices on the chessboard.